Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 14th, 2022. Well, as the war has taken a bad turn for Ukraine, which means for the US, UK, NATO forces, we're going to see more and more crazy proposals coming out. Instead of pushing the government of Ukraine to go for a negotiated settlement, which would include what's a foregone conclusion, which is no Ukraine in NATO and the end of deployment of offensive weapons to Ukraine, instead of doing that, which would be seen as a defeat for the Western warhawks, they're going with more and more crazy ideas. Now here's the latest, which was in an interview with the Italian daily newspaper L'Espresso, an interview with the former foreign minister of Poland, Radoslaw Sikorski. What he said is, quote, "We in the West have the right to give Ukraine nuclear warheads so that it can protect its independence," unquote. To give Ukraine nuclear warheads. Now, not only is he a former foreign minister and a member of the European Parliament, but he's the husband of Anne Applebaum. Now, who is Anne Applebaum? Well, she is one of the hardcore warhawks in the United States, a former editorial board member of the Washington Post. She's currently a member of the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, which played a leading role in the February 2014 regime change coup that brought the present government to power in Ukraine. She has a background of studying in the United Kingdom at the London School of Economics in Oxford, and from there she became a correspondent for The Economist, which is the magazine of the central banks, which was originally founded by the Rothschilds. Since 2008, she's been a leading propagandist against what she calls Putinism. Now, in 2014, in August 2014, she wrote an essay asking whether Ukraine should prepare for total war with Russia and whether Central European governments should join in this. This is in August 2014. And over this longer period, she's been a defender of NATO and European Union expansion, which she said was a wonderful idea and has worked beautifully. Now, not surprisingly, she was an early promoter of the fraudulent narrative of Russiagate, arguing that Putin helped Trump get elected, that Trump was under blackmail threats from Putin, and that if he became president, Trump would be an operative on behalf of Putin and his plan for the expansion of the Russian Empire. So she was a complete supporter of the Russiagate policy and a defender of the fraudulent doctrine or document drafted by Christopher Steele, the former MI6 operative, whose dossier was rejected ultimately by the FBI and has proven to be a series of completely false allegations with no backup to it whatsoever. And this was one of the leading documents that went into the whole Russiagate story. And she was, of course, one of the first to target what she called Russian disinformation. In November 2021, after the Steele dossier was completely trashed, she defended her promotion of it, saying in a Twitter statement, "Even if every word of the Steele dossier was wrong, that would not change the fact that the Russians sought to manipulate the US election using hacked material and a disinformation campaign." A fact? The fact is that the person in charge of cybersecurity for the Democratic Party admitted to the Congress under oath that there was no evidence of a Russian hack. And that this idea that that there was a disinformation campaign against Hillary Clinton based on hacked material is not only not a fact, but it was actually a total concoction, as we just saw in the evidence brought forward in the Sussman trial. She and her allies are the real disinformation operatives. So the question is, what are they trying to cover up? Well, first, we know now they're trying to cover up the likely failure of their intention to use Ukraine as a battering ram to destroy Russia. Secondly, their defense of Nazi militia to kill ethnic Russians is something they want to cover up by claiming that this is Russian disinformation to identify the Azov Regiment and other neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine as Nazi. So the people who say they're protecting you from disinformation are promoting disinformation in defense of what? In defense of outright Nazis. Now they're also covering up the reason for targeting Russia, which is that there's a collapse underway of the global financial system, a systemic disintegration. And they are worried about Russia's role with China and other sovereign nations in opposing what's called the Great Reset, which is an assault on national sovereignty to set up a supranational central bank to control the economic policy and spending policy of all nations. This game, which was launched by the World Economic Forum, by Davos, by the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, Fink of BlackRock, and others, this Great Reset is opposed by most sovereign governments in the world who don't want to give up their sovereignty. And the fact that most of them are not strong enough to do so led previously to attacks on countries that even looked as though they were going to break from the rules-based order, such as Iraq and Libya. But Russia is too strong for them to threaten. So they're trying to destroy it with an economic warfare and actual warfare in Ukraine. Let me just give you two quick updates on the collapse. We start with the latest figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on inflation, which is now Biden's most important issue, he says. Well, the May inflation rate, according to the Consumer Price Index, was up 8.6% over 2021. That is over the course of a year. These figures, I would argue, are probably understated. It's probably higher than that. But even taking their figures, 8.6% is the highest figure since 1981. Food is up 10.1% in 1 year, and energy costs are up 34.6% in 1 year. This is what Biden refers to as Putin's fuel and food tax, and the deputy Russian ambassador to the United Nations quipped yesterday that he guesses that Putin must be the most powerful man in the world because he can impose a tax on the American people, according to Joe Biden. Now, one of the effects of this increased cost is the likely breakdown this summer of the U.S. internal transportation grid. Now, it's not just a global supply chain problem. We're facing a problem directly related to diesel fuel hyperinflation. The costs of diesel are way up, and also there's a lack of diesel exhaust fluid called DEF, which was mandated in a 2010 law which makes diesel burn cleaner. The largest truck stop firm in the country, Pilot Flying J, which accounts for 20% of all diesel and DEF sales to truckers, warns that long-haul trucks, buses, tractors, and other vehicles will be grounded by this shortage. These are just symptoms of a systemic financial breakdown. And this began long before the Russian special military operations in Ukraine, long before the coronavirus. It actually goes back to the policies since 1971 of the Federal Reserve System of going for bailouts whenever the financial bubbles pop. And instead of putting the system through bankruptcy reorganization, they're essentially adopting policies which create bigger bubbles, more profit for the handful of speculators, and more misery for the mass of the population in the United States and Western Europe. And that's why they're going for war. With war, you have the excuse that you can push wartime austerity and then go for a global reorganization under a top-down supranational regime. Now, this can be defeated, but you need a strategy. You need to know what they're trying to do, and you need to know how to defeat it. That's why we have a conference this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. The SchillerInstitute.com will have an online conference on how we can put the world through a financial bankruptcy reorganization and put sovereign national governments back in control of their own economic policy. Join us for that. I'll have a lot more on this during the course of this week, but it's up to you to make a decision to join our mobilization to enact this fight for a new security and financial architecture. Thanks for joining me today. See you again tomorrow.